after the core problem, which is the fact that money is talking, the fact that there's such a disparity of wealth and power that a democratic system simply can't function properly. And that shows up at every point from, for example, the United States in the last 30 years has become rather extreme in this respect, but it's an extreme version of something that exists generally. So, for example, now for the last roughly 30 years in the United States, the Reagan-Thatcher neoliberal period, elections increasingly are simply bought. Literally, you can predict the outcome of an election quite well by just looking at the amount of campaign spending, and you can predict the policies that are pursued by asking about where that campaign spending comes from. So it should surprise no one that Obama, despite his nice talk, is essentially pursuing the policies of a small financial elite. Yeah, that's where his funding came from. That's where it's going to come from in the next election. Actually, this goes back very far. There's good studies of it by fine political economists, but it's been very sharply exaggerated in these neoliberal structures, not just in the United States, everywhere. By now, it's reached the point where even in Congress, the old traditions of parliamentary functioning have been pretty much dissolved. So it used to be the case that someone in Congress would get a position of influence, say chair of a committee, on the basis of seniority and performance. A lot of questions about that, but at least that was the idea. That's been pretty much thrown to the winds. If you want a committee chair at this point, you have to buy it from the party. You have to put money in the party coffers, then maybe you'll get the chair. Now that simply drives members of Congress into the pockets of the corporate sector, by now mostly the financial sector, and further erodes democracy. And what you describe in the media is part of that. Incidentally, it holds of not just the media. I do write about the media, but personally I don't think it's very different from the general intellectual community. If you look at the elite media, the opinion, that's sometimes called the agenda-setting media, the ones that provide the framework that smaller newspapers adhere to, New York Times, CBS News, and so on. Those, I don't think there's much difference between their conceptions and their boundaries and those that you find in, say, the academic world. They share the same general academic culture. It's easier to study the media than to study scholarship, because it's just easier to carry out careful analyses and so on and so forth. But I've done a lot on this. I've written a lot about it if you're interested, but I don't think it's very different. And it all reflects, to a substantial extent, the actual distribution of power in the society. That's an observation that's considered radical, but it's as old as Adam Smith. I mean, Adam Smith was not the caricature that you read about in elementary school. Smith, for example, recognized that in England, the England of his day, the people who basically owned the society, the merchants and manufacturers, he said they are the principal architects of government policy, and they design policy so that their own interests are very well served. However,